Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about specifically what it means to have your Saturn in Sagittarius and Saturn in the 9th house. My name is Brandon. I do astrology videos here on YouTube, and this is part of a much larger series that I'm working on, where I specifically do every single planet and every single sign and house. So this is the final video for the Sagittarius 9th house week. I have done everything prior to this in Sagittarius, as well as every planet prior to Sagittarius and every house planet to the 9th prior to the 9th house. So I've done everything between Aries and Scorpio, as well as everything between the 1st and the 8th house. So if you have any planets in any of those signs or houses, feel free to check out that link down below. There's going to be a playlist. You can check that out, and you can kind of just roam around amongst all the different videos to get a better idea. If you are watching this video and you do have your Saturn in the 9th house, I would recommend that you watch the sign first. So if you have your Saturn in the 9th house, but it's in Taurus or Cancer or Leo, I would recommend watching those videos first. Obviously, if your Saturn's in a sign after this one, then just wait for that to come out and watch that first. You can still watch this video, but it's really important to kind of get a full cohesive approach to kind of put the house with the sign, because not everyone is going to have Saturn and Sagittarius in the 9th house. It's not that common. So I just want to let you guys know that if that's part of what you do. A couple of things as well, I'm going to put in timestamps down below. I'm going to be talking about a couple things here. One, I'm going to be talking about Saturn specifically in astrology. Then I'm going to be talking about Saturn in Sagittarius, and then Saturn in the 9th house. So there's going to be timestamps for those down below. And then any way that you guys want to connect with me, that's also going to be down below as well. So feel free to check that out if you want to book with me. And obviously, since this is YouTube, please like, comment, share, subscribe. All those things do help me out because I love what I do here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So without further ado, let's go into and talk about specifically what Saturn means in astrology. Okay, so Saturn within astrology. So Saturn in astrology is going to be considered one of the more difficult placements. The thing about Saturn, it takes a lot of time to learn what Saturn is trying to teach you. And so wherever Saturn sits by sign, by house, by aspect, those are all going to be things that Saturn is going to delay, and Saturn's going to really have you work very hard at, trying to overcome, trying to establish, trying to build some sort of foundation. And it's typically not until the age of around 28 or 30 or so that you tend to see kind of the fruits of your labor, or the understanding of what Saturn really is trying to teach you relative to your chart. I did a whole video with another astrologer on Saturn cycles, so make sure to check that out down below. We did a whole podcast together on that, where we talked about Saturn cycles in regards to the 7, 14, 21, and 28 years and what to kind of expect. And so the really important thing is to know specifically that Saturn is going to take time, and it's typically around that age of 28 that we see Saturn return, and that's when we really start to really understand Saturn's lesson relative to our specific Saturn sign. So in this example, it would be Saturn in Sagittarius or Saturn in the 9th house. So I say all that to say that that's really important to know that that cycle works. Obviously, as well, if you are ruled by Saturn, so if you're a Capricorn rising or an Aquarius rising, or you are a very heavy Capricorn or Aquarius like stellium, especially sun sign included within that, your Saturn placement is going to have a lot of importance there. So just know those are some things. And then Saturn's dignity. So Saturn naturally rules Capricorn and Aquarius, like I just mentioned. So therefore, the signs opposite Capricorn and Aquarius are going to be difficult or kind of uncomfortable for Saturn to be in. So that would be in Cancer and Leo. And then Saturn is considered to be exalted in Libra, which means that it kind of functions at its highest. It has a lot of success in that regard, and it kind of works really well in that specific sign. And then that means that the inverse of that is where Saturn does not do well. So Saturn in the opposite sign of Libra, being Aries, is not really necessarily the best place for Saturn. And I've done all those Saturn videos, so you're welcome to check those out as well for a better idea, specifically if you have any of those outside of, I haven't done Capricorn and Aquarius, but all the other ones I have done. And so feel free to check those out if you have anything that's not Saturn and Saturn signs, essentially. So yeah, so that's really all I wanted to say about Saturn there. Just know that it just takes time. It's a patience aspect here. And there's a lot about maturity, a lot about like older things, wisdom, things that are really staying the test of time, or things that take a long time, a lot of commitment, a lot of lessons around just the way that we feel mature, really, honestly. And that's why that Saturn return really does bring out a lot of that maturity in a lot of ways. So yeah, so just kind of wanted to know that there. So without further ado, let's go into what you guys are probably all here for in the Saturn Sagittarius. So we have Saturn in the sign of Sagittarius. So Saturn is now in a Jupiter-ruled sign. And when it comes to Sagittarius, this is all about everything relative to our belief, our faith, a lot of our worldview, our ideologies, our concept of religion and law. And so Saturn in Sagittarius is such a unique placement because of the fact that it has this kind of Saturn-Jupiter-esque quality. So if you've watched any of these videos relative to Sagittarius, and I know I'll bring this up in regards to everything Capricorn, but there is this sense of when you are aware of Jupiter, you also have to be aware of Saturn and vice versa. So if we have Saturn in Jupiter's domain, this energy kind of just naturally kind of connects things, right? In a somewhat complementary way, not in the same way as it does for Venus and Mars, because Venus and Mars' sign and Mars and Venus' sign is not necessarily that comfortable. But in this example, we put Saturn in the sign of Sagittarius. It actually does quite well because Saturn and Jupiter, they're complementary energies, but they're not necessarily like very different. They're not very different, or they're meant to work together, right? And that's the difference between like Venus and Mars and Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn and Jupiter, they have this natural affinity towards helping one another. Venus and Mars has that same way, except when we get too far on either end of those things, it can get a little bit rough. So that's why I think it's interesting when we put Saturn and Jupiter together here, because it really, really forces us to have a very strong sense of like our own faith, our own religion, our own worldview. And Saturn here, one of the things I find so interesting, there's such a philosophical like bend to this placement. And I've been both personally involved and obviously professionally involved with a lot of Saturn and Sagittariuses. And one of the things that I have found is they always have a very interesting upbringing relative to religion and belief and spirituality, and their relationship with what they believe the world to be is typically very not skewed, but it's unclear until that age of 30. So their faith is really tested during their Saturn return. And so if you do have your Saturn in Sag and you are obviously older, you would have been, going through your Saturn return around the ages of around 2014, 2017. And that would have been quite a large amount of time of testing your faith, testing your worldview, a lot of like studying things and really getting to a point of mastering some sort of craft. And a lot of the time we see with Saturn in Sag, because Sag is that kind of thing you want to study, the thing you believe is purposeful to your life. And so with Saturn in Sag, we can see a lot of people that will go through many, many, many uphill battles of figuring out what they want to study, who they want to be, what they want to get for their career, what is the best degree or the best topic for them to study, or the best path for them to get the best career that they can. Because Saturn's all about career, and then Sagittarius is all about like the belief to get that, the schooling to get to that career, the kind of teaching, preaching, like what do you want, like what are you doing your career for, right? It's not necessarily like just having a career and having a place in the world. Like that's just very Saturn and Saturn sign, right? This is where Saturn is in Jupiter's sign, and it's wanting to understand like how and why I am going after what I want. More specifically, why? Because Sagittarius is very much like the why kind of archetype of why are we doing this? Why are we going this direction? Why am I studying this? There could be a lot of pressures during a very young age of trying to figure out the why of why am I doing this? What am I here to do? What is all this about? Like, why are we even here? And it's so fun because I remember a very distinct conversation that I had with someone that had a Saturn in Sagittarius that was just a passerby, and I never actually really, really, really read their chart outside of the fact that I was able to calculate they were a Saturn in Sagittarius, and I asked them. And it's very interesting because they have such a very, very strong worldview and a very strong religious connection, but they're also intrigued because Sagittarius is a very curious sign. It is this one that's like, okay, well, why do we believe that? Can you explain that to me? Can you explain to me the meaning? Can you explain to me those things? And I remember I had this conversation with this man for at least a good like 10, 15 minutes about like, I guess the mechanics of astrology, if you will, or the meaning behind astrology, or my belief and my worldview of astrology. And I've had this primarily with a lot of like Saturn that's in like mutable signs, but Saturn and Sag was probably the most that I've had this, where there's been like this very interesting ideological worldview, because the thing is, Sagittarius rules belief, and Saturn wants us to believe in something. And when we take the time to go through all of our life and finally believe in something, that's a big deal to like finally figure that out. So of course we're not going to want to change that or waver that or move from that. And of course we've studied all this time to master this craft or master this perspective or master this worldview. And so we're not going to like just give that away. But Saturn and Sag is still curious about like the meaning behind things, the philosophies of others, the worldview of others, the cultures of others, and the traditions of others as well. And that's something I think is really interesting with Saturn and Sag. There's almost this traditional like approach that we tend to see here, because Saturn is very traditional in and of itself, right? It's a very much tradition oriented, but like sturdy, consistent, stands the test of time, keeps doing it kind of planet. And then Sagittarius, if you watch any of my other videos, there is a sense of tradition with Sagittarius that I think we don't really talk about. And it's the tradition in the sense that it comes from the worldview and from the family and the culture that you came in. So you can find with Saturn and Sag that there's this kind of like cultural kind of battle between who they believe themselves to be from their family, like who their family believes they should be, or what their family's traditions tell them they should be, or their family's belief systems, or their family's religion, or all those different things, like what those kind of tell them that their meaning of their life is, or where their life should go. And I think that's something that you see with like, I think that's a very like Saturn immutable thing, because I think it's because Saturn is an immutable energy. It's an energy that's really like kind of trying to mix and match and kind of go from different areas and kind of be really adaptable. And so there is this sense of like needing to change the worldview, needing to adapt to other worldviews, needing to kind of take in other perspectives. And that's why I think Saturn in a mutable sign is so interesting, because it still, after the Saturn return, still has that kind of curiosity, that kind of like, well, we can pivot here, we can go here, but the thing is, they know where those boundaries lie, right? So I think something that's really unique about Saturn and Sag, as well as Saturn and Pisces, is it's this kind of like, we figure out our worldview, we figure out our belief system, we figure out why we're here, we figure out those sorts of really big questions, right, that we ask typically around the Saturn square, which is 21 years old or so. We typically start asking those sorts of questions. But what I find interesting is during the Saturn return, most mutable Saturns that I've met and talked to during that first Saturn return, they really figure out what their meaning is, or what is most meaningful to them to move forward in their life, and like what they believe in and why they believe what they believe in. And there is like a sense of calling back to their past and their family and their heritage in that regard, for sure. But what's interesting now is now they have a really big foundation or a really big framework to be like, okay, I believe what I believe. Throw other stuff at me. I'm still going to keep learning about other belief systems and other worldviews and ideologies and philosophies and religions. Like, I want to learn all these different things, but I know where my main foundation is at. And that will take a lot of time. And I think that's, once again, that's something I think is just true for all Saturn in mutable energies, because they tend to spend so much time trying to pivot too far into other directions, and you can see them going in kind of like extreme areas as opposed to being more narrow in their worldview or more narrow in their opinion. And I don't mean that in like narrow-mindedness or like not openness. I just mean more solid, right? More kind of building those foundational building blocks of like, why do I believe what I believe, right? Why have I studied this thing? What does this do, right? And that's something I find so unique about the Saturn and Pisces generation in specific. And I know we're not even at that video yet, but it's the other Saturn Jupiter sign, and I think it bears some comparison here, where I know a lot of Saturn and Pisces myself, and it's interesting because they get so caught into such unique energies, and they study a lot of just energetic dynamics. They study, mediumship, they study kind of crystals, they study all these different things, and they have this kind of more subtlety to them, and a subtle meaning to things. And I think when Saturn's in Pisces, it's very different than Saturn in Sag, but it has that same kind of wanting to find the meaning in things. And with Saturn and Sag, it has to go about and do it. It has to go about and try it and experiment, do those things. Saturn and Pisces still has that, but it's more of a experience that's like felt and received and like internalized, right? Kind of like, ooh, let me hold this crystal and see how it feels. Let me look at this, this meditative practice, or look at this thing and see how it feels. Whereas Saturn and Sag would say, well, I'm going to go and do those things. I'm going to go and try this culture. I'm going to go and study this thing. I'm going to go and like actually expose myself with, because it's fire sign as well. I'm going to go and expose myself to this thing. Now, kind of on that as well, because Saturn is a fire sign, you can see here that there's going to be a natural kind of diminishing of one's willpower, one's energy, one's light, one's confidence, until after that Saturn return. Because Saturn in a fire sign is going to just, it's going to delay that. It's going to delay your ability to feel your own inspiration, your own spark, your own creative joy, your own sort of like guiding light, if you will. You're not going to feel really assured in that when Saturn's in a fire sign until that Saturn return. And that's going to be kind of this desire to kind of go in a bunch of different directions and try a bunch of different things and be impulsive. And it's about really reining that in. And I think a lot of the confidence you see with Saturn in a fire sign, a lot of confidence comes after that Saturn return, because they know what their worldview is. They know why they were put upon the path that they were put on. And that's something I think is really interesting about Saturn in like a Jupiter sign, is their Saturn return is such a philosophical time, which I think is why it's so cool, if you are Saturn in Sagittarius, to look back at the 2014, 2017 era and see how that lined up with all of these lessons relative to Saturn and Sag, which are all things like learning your meaning. Why am I here? Why did I study what I study? Why did I finish my college degree, my master's degree, my PhD? Those sorts of things are very Saturn and Sag, like finishing a big college degree or a big study or a big, long-standing kind of legal battle or a long-standing sort of philosophical debate as well. Like there could be this kind of like nagging kind of like, I don't understand this, I don't get this, I don't know why this had to happen. There's a lot of those sorts of things, and then the Saturn return comes and it all makes sense, and you'll understand why your family had to put you through what you went through, why you had to live the life that you have lived and live those struggles that you have lived at that point to really get to where you're at. And it's such a beautiful time after the Saturn return. And I think prior to it, though, there is definitely this quite large philosophical and identity crisis. Not really identity crisis, but like, I guess it does make a little bit of sense if you do have an identity crisis with Saturn and Sag, but it's more of like the why am I here? What am I doing? Why do I believe in this? Like, what is the truth? What are the answers? What do we believe in? What do we make up of the world? Like, what is there out there, right? That's something that you tend to see with Saturn in Sag, is like this kind of like need to solidify the worldview, need to solidify the beliefs, those sorts of things. And it takes time. It takes time to figure that out. There is also this really prominent energy with Saturn and Sag of specifically working in law or working in foreign cultures, foreign trade, working in a foreign land, right? There's almost like a sense of a career in Jupiterian things. So it can be within publishing, it can be within translation work, it can be within things that are just very, legal in nature, or just very much connect, because Saturn really does well in legality as well as Jupiter. So there can be this like going to law school. If you have a really prominent Jupiter, there is definitely like a prominence of going to law school or getting brought into those legal things, especially as you age. There's a big push into legal sort of lessons in that regard. So really interesting there in a lot of ways. And then with Saturn and Sag, it is important to look at Jupiter's placement, obviously. If Jupiter is with Saturn, there's a lot of other placements that it can be in. If Saturn's making an aspect or not to Jupiter, there's a lot of conversations there. Obviously, look at your Jupiter placement to get a better idea of like why you believe what you believe. Obviously, the Jupiter placement is going to really help you understand more of what specific type of belief system you're battling or you're trying to synthesize or really bring into form over time. Knowing your Jupiter placement is really important for this one. And then, of course, with that as well, the Jupiter return is a really big deal for Saturn and Sag specifically. So look to the ages of 12, 24, and 36, and then obviously 48, 60, things like that moving forward, for pretty prominent times where Jupiter will return to where it is. So pretty big deal for anyone that has prominent Sagittarius placements. But more specifically, I want to point to the one at 36 or so, 35, 36, because that will also be a Saturn square. So if you happen to be watching this as a Saturn Sagittarius in the year of 2024 and potentially 2025, you'll be going through your Saturn square as well as partially your Jupiter return at the same time. And so there's a lot of stuff around that time and that transit. that is really telling of your beliefs kind of being tested and kind of looking back at what happened between 2014 and 2017 for you. So just kind of a little framework I wanted to bring up there for you. Now, a couple other things with Saturn and Sag. Like I said, there's a big cultural kind of importance here. And I think it's really important to make sure that your beliefs and what you're bringing into form and what you believe in is not simply capitalistic or not simply kind of it's hard because Saturn and Sag and Saturn and Pisces, they want to be of service, or they want to know who or what they are aiming towards. And it's hard when you have Saturn and Sag and Pisces because you want to aim towards something, and you have a sense of what that is and what you believe that to be. But with Saturn and Sag, it's almost like it takes a lot of time and a lot of exposure to a lot of different religions and worldviews and cultures and things for you to figure out like what it is that is out there. Why am I following this truth? Why am I going and just aimlessly going this direction? What is the meaning of this? Why am I here? Right? What are we all here for? And there's this sense of like wanting to connect to something, to some divinity, and to some like higher power, higher truth, higher knowledge. And that's something that I think Saturn and Sag really learns over time, is how to connect with their own higher guidance, their own internal knowledge, and their own worldview that they've been able to establish, and understanding that not everyone's worldview, actually, as a matter of fact, no one's worldview is going to be the exact same. Yes, cultures have their own sort of traditions and approaches to things, but at the end of the day, everyone's within that culture as well has their own entire framework and thought process and way of looking at things. And it's really important to be able to break apart what your belief is separate of other people's, while also having respect for other people's and their process and their path. And I think with Saturn and Sag, it definitely understands that, but it's also about knowing that your path is yours and knowing what beliefs got you to what you believe in and got you to where you are today, and how they can either hinder you or support you in the future. And I think it's a lot about solidifying those beliefs and making sure that they're consistently being something that you are working on over and over and over again, to revisit and kind of reassess and re-explore. Like I said, it's Saturn in a fire sign. It's also Saturn in a fire sign that is mutable. So it's like kind of going all around, and it's trying all this different stuff, and it's taste testing a bunch of things. And I think taste testing is great. It's really important to get a refined palate and a refined cultural palate, especially. And I think that's something that Sag really experiences and Jupiter really wants, is to have a very wide range of things. But then Saturn's like, make it practical, make it make sense. So your career likely has something related to all of the really fine cultural or philosophical, spiritual kind of perspectives that you've gone on, and then you're teaching that, or you're helping others with that, or you're leading some sort of corporation that is foreign, or that has different cultures that it works with, and it allows you to kind of work in that way. So many different things that Saturn can do in Sagittarius. Like I said, it's important to look at Saturn's placements, both by house, by aspect, all sorts of things to get a better idea for that. But yeah, I really hope this video helped you guys, Saturn and Sag, because that Sagittarius placement is a little rough, but it is one of my favorite ones to see, because it allows me to know that person that I'm talking to with Saturn and Sag has so much knowledge and so much that they have wanted to learn, wanted to explore, wanted to kind of, like I said, kind of taste test throughout their life. And it gives them, as long as they lean into that curiosity and they keep that curiosity and they keep that light and that confidence kind of heightened throughout their life, Saturn will do great in Sagittarius. It's also going to want them to keep consistently growing and learning. So keep your mind open, and consistently kind of building your framework, your perspective, your kind of truth in that way. And it's a beautiful one. It really is. I really love this one in lots of ways. And I hope that anyone that watches this Saturn and Sag really enjoys this, and I hope it helped you in some way, shape, or form. Even helped you just kind of validate some things. That's really my goal here. And obviously, if you like this video, please like, comment, share, subscribe. All those things help me. And then obviously, if you like me as a astrologer, you like what I say, feel free to check out all my stuff down below to book me, all those different things down there. So thank you. I appreciate you, Saturn and Sagittarius. And I'll see you guys in the next part. We talk about specifically what Saturn means in the 9th house. All right, so we have Saturn in the 9th house. So Saturn in the 9th house, this is going to place Saturn pretty high up during the course of the day. So it is going to be kind of close to the midheaven. It's going to be close to the top of the chart, which inadvertently kind of has a lot of public kind of recognition, public sort of energy around it. Yes, it is not at the top of the chart, but yes, it is moving towards setting eventually over many hours. But Saturn in the 9th house has specifically different things relative to it based off of Saturn's sign and like aspects, things like that. And I want to let you know I've gone through almost every single Saturn sign prior to this. So everything that is any sign, but besides obviously Saturn in Sag, Saturn in Capricorn, Aquarius, or Pisces, but everything prior to that I've already done. So I'd recommend you watch that video first and foremost to get a better idea of what Saturn does in your specific sign, and then kind of overlay it with Saturn in this specific house. Because Saturn in the 9th house, a lot of what I said in the Saturn and Sag part is going to kind of coincide, but it's going to be a little bit stronger in certain aspects. So one of the things that I find with Saturn in the 9th that is pretty prominent is if you put Saturn in the 9th house, there's going to be a lot more of a focus around the college journey and the college struggle, and kind of maybe working at a college is a very prominent thing for Saturn in the 9th house, as well as Saturn in Sag. But Saturn in the 9th can make that be a really big uphill battle, something that really needs to take a lot of time to study and work towards, and just consistent work and consistent uphill kind of struggle. It can also bring particularly stronger placements towards law. In the 9th house, yes, Saturn in Sagittarius can still indicate those things, but it's a little bit different because Saturn in Sag is going to have more of a kind of just trying to figure out the worldview, trying to figure out what they want. Yes, Saturn in the 9th house still has that, but the 9th house is a place that we go to find truth and to find out what the laws are that we're working with. And those two places are going to be either like a giant library or a giant school or a PhD program or something like that, or a foreign travel, or it's going to be a courthouse where we figure out the truth of what's going on, or the kind of legal kind of systems, right, that are kind of, or the laws, because the 9th house is laws as well. So Saturn in the 9th can have a really long-standing legal battle as well, that wouldn't be as much the same as Saturn in Sag. The 9th house can have a lot more of a it's a place, it's an actual place that we go, and that's why Sagittarius has it has those kind of indications with that, but there's a difference because the 9th house is actually literally like that kind of place that we go before we go to work or before we go to our career. And when I say before we go to work, I mean like kind of what we study, what we go after, what we build prior to our career. And so with Saturn in the 9th, it's really important to make sure that you learn all those lessons from whatever Saturn is trying to teach you in that 9th house, in regards to law or worldview or cultures or mentors as well. I didn't really speak on this with Saturn and Sag in regards to like mentorships and kind of like that whole process, but there is a pretty prominent connection with the 9th house as well as Sagittarius that is related to mentors and connecting to some guru and something to that effect. So but just know that that's part of it. But yeah, typically the 9th house Saturns, they're going to have like some long-standing legal, cultural kind of not issue, but kind of battle in their head, kind of that they're working on kind of unraveling, figuring out those sorts of things. And so with Saturn in the 9th house, obviously we're going to go through like every single sign here. I'm going to try and keep this brief, but just know I have spoken on every single Saturn sign prior to this one, so everything but, you know, the signs after this one, but those will eventually be out as well. So I would definitely recommend that if you have your Saturn in any sign prior to this, which you more than likely will, as opposed to not, check out those videos first and foremost, and then come back to this one. Now, Saturn in the 9th in a Martian ruled sign, so that's either in Aries or Scorpio. Saturn in the 9th with both of these ones, this is going to be like the consistent actual battle, right? The fighting for truth, fighting for your own way, fighting for your own kind of belief system, going after that. Saturn in Aries is going to have more of a kind of long-standing battle, mainly specifically with their father, in regards to like why their father had to teach them what they taught them, or the world, and kind of like really reintegrating the truth of the situation from their father, and kind of really breaking that apart and making sure that it is truly theirs, and through their own actions. They really trust their own actions, their own initiation, those sorts of things. And then from there, we have Saturn in Scorpio. This is obviously another version of trusting your own actions, except with Saturn in Scorpio in the 9th. This is going to have more of a... it's going to have more of a harder kind of time with what a worldview is. So this is where you'll see a lot of divorce proceedings, specifically like divorce court things, or working with like alimony or inheritances. There's going to be like a really big legal battle at some point, probably, maybe possibly during the Saturn return, relative to like, how did we divvy up the money? How did we divvy up, you know, legally, and how did we go through that? There's like something with like custody. That's also similar to like Saturn and Leo too. There's like another aspect with that, with custody battles in the 9th house. But there's a definite, the 9th house in Sag, there's a very strong, I'm sorry, 9th house in Scorpio, there's a very strong mentorship and unethical mentorship that tends to happen with Saturn in the 9th house, in Scorpio in specific. If you have that, I'd recommend you definitely watch Saturn Scorpio video, because I go pretty deeply into that, and like the whole like philosophy and the whole breaking down of one's like trust of an external authority and trusting themselves. And so there's a lot about them trusting themselves to figure out their own truth. That's really a big part of Saturn and Scorpio, and not relying on external circumstances. I'm enlightened to be kind of more the internal Martian thing. But there's a battle there. There is a battle there with that Martian energy. Saturn in a Venus ruled sign. So this is where you'll see, like I said, I've been saying this throughout this entire series here, but this is where you'll see like the financial kind of difficulties with Saturn and or just any planet really, and in a Venus sign in the 9th house, the financial component of going to school, more specifically Saturn in Taurus than Saturn in Libra. Saturn in Taurus in the 9th is going to have a little bit more of like the literal, like I can't figure out what I want to study, or studying, going to school, or studying and going to get this degree, or going and learning this course, or studying abroad even. There's going to be a partial part of that really wants to study abroad too, with Saturn and Taurus in the 9th house. And it's just the financial aspect of that that's really hard to work towards. So there's an aspect of that needs to be definitely unraveled in that way as well. Saturn in Libra, the other Venusian sign, this is obviously where Saturn exalts, so it does quite well here. But this is where you'll see a lot of legal, being a lawyer, working in courthouses, connecting to those sorts of spaces, those sorts of people, those sorts of relationships. You could go through a very significant relationship that goes through a legal process, and obviously being married, there's a big part of that as well. But I think this one would be really interesting to hear about if you have Saturn in Libra, specifically in that 9th house, especially because for this particular one, you will also be your chart ruler, considering you will be a Aquarius rising, so Saturn will be in Taurus in that 9th house. So you yourself are also being brought to that 9th house area. So there's a really strong prominence, if you have this placement, specifically Saturn in Libra in the 9th house, of you becoming a lawyer. Honestly, that's really a lot of what you see here, or some sort of advocacy for, you know, being a guru. There's something about that as well, like being some sort of guru or teacher or mentor to others after being mentored, or after going through significant relationships. There could be a really great coaching placement as well, especially coaching for societal means, helping people in like a more social PR, HR kind of thing. Whenever I think of Aquarius and Libra together, I think of like an HR department. So that's something there, with, especially because it is your chart ruler is going into the 9th house. So yeah, so you become really philosophical. You are meant to bring a lot of kind of connections to other people. Sorry, I keep going like this because I keep seeing, what I'm doing is I'm seeing the charts. That's why I'm doing the things. That's why I'm keeping the same like motion of the hand. But yeah, like it brings you there, and it supports the ascendant. So it is a really good placement with Saturn and Libra in that 9th house. It's actually a really strong placement as well. And I'd love to hear your story if you have that particularly, because there is a lot there to unbox. Yeah, for sure. And then moving on from Saturn in Venus ruled signs, we have Saturn Mercury ruled signs. So Saturn in Gemini and in Virgo here. In that 9th house, there's going to be an aspect of this that has a obviously communication delay. They could have careers in specifically like writing legal code or helping with those things. That's also something you could see with the Saturn in Libra, or the Aquarius rising. You can also see that, where there's kind of this like advocacy, writing laws, getting connected to legal kind of advocacy things. Saturn in Gemini has more of that than not. There is something with like community work here, pretty prominent as well, with Saturn and Gemini, because you are also Libra rising, so there's this like kind of interesting connection there, of kind of like a social or societal kind of responsibility, essentially. That's something you'll see as well with Aquarius risings with that Saturn and Libra in the ninth. And then Saturn and Virgo has a very similar thing. This is someone that has a lot of pressure from their family to go to school, to be a doctor, to go to school, to be a lawyer, especially more so to be a lawyer, I think is more prominent with that one. Saturn and Virgo has a very, very strict life, and very hardworking. And in the ninth house, it's hardworking towards something they believe to be purposeful. And I think with Saturn and Virgo, it's a lot about the specific work that they do and what they do in their day-to-day to be purposeful. So it's about really making the routine really, really solid and fine-tuned in that way. So I think it's a really prominent one there with Saturn and another Mercury ruled sign. And also making sure that your mental health is really important, and your health around how you, and that's something else as well with Saturn and Gemini. I want to also state this, like Saturn and Gemini and Saturn Virgo, they both have this energy of taking care of their mental health and taking care of those mental boundaries, right? I said this with Saturn and Sag as well, with the other mutable Saturn signs. They kind of just don't know the limits of their own belief system or their own understanding of the world, and so they kind of like go out and too far, or go and get lost in something, or go and explore something that's not really the right answer, and they keep feeling like they're kind of tripping over themselves. And so both of those, Saturn and Gemini and Saturn and Virgo, it's really about being able to synthesize their own both their routine in regards to Virgo and like what they do every day in their spiritual practice, and then with Gemini, it's like their own understanding of the world, their own worldview, their own perspective, and be able to bring that into their specific kind of day-to-day. Another one with this one is Saturn and Virgo. This is another chart ruler being in the ninth house. So we have Capricorn rising, Saturn and Virgo in the ninth house. You yourself are Capricorn being placed in the ninth house. So once again, kind of similar things to what I said with Saturn and Libra, a little bit different, because Saturn exalts in Libra, so it does really, really well here for Aquarius risings, and obviously Aquarius risings are different than Capricorn risings. Capricorn risings have more of the like specific Saturn kind of energy, and in Virgo in the ninth house, this can be kind of a really deep service that you give once you learn what you're here to do. Once you learn what you went to school for, this is where you'll see like a lot of hardworking doctors and lawyers and those like technicians and engineers, especially engineers. I think that's more of one, like an engineer is very Saturn Virgo in the ninth house with a Capricorn rising, very much that, like a long-standing kind of like, so like kind of career around legal things or kind of teaching something. I find that Virgo placements can be really prominent in the teaching space, and Saturn can have a career in teaching, both in Virgo as well as, because it's very methodical, as well as in the ninth house. So there could be an aspect of that, or studying to be a doctor. Going to trade school can also be a really big thing as well. With Saturn and Virgo in general, that's just kind of a thing with Saturn and Virgo, but in the ninth house, it can also have this kind of quality of really working to understand the beliefs of the world. And that's something with the Virgo ninth house. I have this myself. It makes it kind of hard to figure out the application of what you believe. And so with Saturn there, it's like you yourself are trying to apply everything that you're learning about the world, and you can't quite figure it out until that age of 30 or so to kind of understand more specifically what it is that you really want to work towards, what you want your day-to-day to be. And that's where the mental health thing is coming in. And I think with this particular placement, I'm only kind of hitting on this one harder because it is a Capricorn rising chart, and we're talking about Saturn. With this one in particular, it's really about maintaining that healthy distance between what you do for work and your beliefs. I think there's a really important distinction to have between the work that you do being very meaningful and the work that you do to be all that you are, right? And that's something that I think that can happen with Saturn specifically. Over time, it's like you become so crystallized in that specific way. So I think with Saturn and Virgo, make sure that you're doing like a mental exercise to like kind of distance yourself from what you've believed to be true and what you've applied, and making a routine around learning other things, studying other things, going into different directions. That can be really helpful for this particular placement, and making sure that you are not getting too identified with the beliefs that are being presented to you, and make sure that you're trying to apply them. Or build them. There's a lot of building belief systems and building kind of a foundational belief system within yourself over time with this one. That's Saturn in the ninth house in general, but in Virgo specifically, it's kind of this very prominent, like I am working every day to build this thing, to build this routine, right? So that's Saturn in Virgo. Sorry, I'm like yapped on that one for a while, but Moving on from there, we have Saturn in the Sun and the Moon. So in Leo, this one I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier here, but there is a sense of like child protection or child laws, or working within a child custody battle. There could be some with that as well. There's something here about creating for creation's sake. Saturn in Leo, as well as Saturn in Virgo, for different reasons for Saturn Virgo than Saturn Leo. There's a sense of disconnecting from one's beliefs, and not over-identifying with one's belief system in this regard. Saturn in Leo here, it's hard too because this particular chart is going to be a Sag rising, so they're going to have a natural inclination to belief and meaning and purpose and trying to figure that out. And having Saturn and Leo in that ninth can be a little restricting of who you are, and why you are here. So there can be this deep identity crisis with the belief systems with Saturn in the ninth in Leo specifically, but ultimately it comes from a real deep understanding of why your childhood was the way that it was, as well as why you're creatively wanting the things that you want out of life, and not letting the beliefs in your life kind of shame you in that regard. For some reason, this feels, as well as Saturn in Aquarius, but more so Saturn in Leo for some reason, even though it would technically be the other way around. Saturn in Leo, this feels very much like, in the ninth house, this feels very much like the family unit, or the child that becomes something that is very different from the family's belief system. So if you have a very traditional or conservative kind of family, you become very different than that. Or if you are a very, normal, or not normal, but very non-traditional family, you become very traditional. It's very much about like kind of going against the belief systems of the family. And that's, like I said, Saturn in Leo, but also Saturn in Aquarius, but weirdly enough, more Saturn in Leo. For some reason, it just fits better with this one. And then Saturn in Cancer in the ninth. This is where the family traditions and the leaving home, studying to leave home. And I meant to mention this with Saturn in Leo as well, but there's an aspect of being the one that maybe just doesn't go against the family's traditions in regards to like worldview, but also goes and studies something and becomes the very first to, go and be a entirely, the first PhD person in their family, or the first person to graduate college, right? There could be aspects there. And then with Saturn in Aries can also have that for different reasons. And Saturn in Cancer can have that, but there's a difference between this and Saturn in Cancer. Saturn in Cancer, there's a very heavy responsibility for the family. And so they could go to school specifically for the family, for to help the family and for to provide for the family in that regard. But there can also be like a kind of restrictingness of like not feeling safe enough to go into other cultural things. This is a really interesting one. If you ever Saturn in Cancer in the ninth house, I would be very interested to hear. I mean, if you are watching this right now and you are, you'd be born around like 2003 or 4, I want to say, to have that placement. So you'd be quite young at this point. But it would still be worth it to kind of look to see how that is for you and your family and your worldview. And yeah, the mom and the family unit's kind of very impressed upon tradition. There's a very heavy responsibility, and there's a very heavy cultural responsibility that you have for your family. That's kind of true for all Saturn in the ninth houses, but Saturn Cancer in specific. And it's about getting into those feelings and really kind of breaking apart that family karma and that ancestral kind of patterning in that way. Yeah. And then Saturn and Jupiter sign, I already talked about Saturn in Pisces, or Saturn and Sag here. But if it is Saturn and Sag, it's just a lot heavier kind of, you maybe were specifically brought into a religious community or religious kind of orientation in that regard. There could be something on that. And then Saturn in Pisces in the ninth. There's definitely some immigration stuff here. Immigration or working with homeless people, working with mental health laws, working with hospice, working, like I said, with immigration, working with foreign residency visas, stuff like that can be a really big part of this particular story here. Saturn in Pisces, this does make you a Cancer rising, so there's a kind of family, that's why I think for this one there's more of like an immigration kind of status here, kind of brought into that. So just interesting with that placement in particular, but obviously we'll get to Saturn in Pisces eventually. But there is a sense with Saturn in Pisces of Pisces ninth house is just kind of, they get lost in a lot of people's beliefs and stuff. And so Saturn in Pisces in that ninth house, as a Cancer rising, it makes you really sensitive to getting lost in people's worldviews. So similar to what I said earlier with Saturn and Sag in the ninth, where they kind of get lost in kind of taste testing too many things and overwhelming their palate to some degree. Pisces can drown themselves in just too many belief systems, too many things, right? and get lost and not know what their truth is and what their meaning is. So there's an aspect of that too. And obviously I want to say this too, if you have any of these placements and you want me to go further into them and you want me to kind of dive into your chart, because it is important to look at the entirety of the chart. Obviously I'm trying to do as much as I can in these little mini segments here. But obviously it's important to look at the ruler of Saturn to see what's going on with that part, also to see what else is in the 9th house, if there is something else in the 9th house, or the aspects to Saturn, so many different things. Here, obviously, like where Saturn's at in your current chart, if you're prior or post-Saturn return. So there's a lot of aspects there that are important. And then obviously on this portion, now Saturn in its own sign, Saturn Capricorn Aquarius, in the 9th house. Saturn Capricorn here in the 9th house, really strong kind of capitalistic belief systems. There's something about indoctrination here that is pretty prominent. It's funny, I would think that indoctrination is just a Saturn 9th house thing, and it's funny that I never mentioned it until the last one in Saturn sign. But there is a sense of breaking apart what is non-traditional or what is too traditional or too outdated. And that's also similar with Saturn in Aquarius, but a little bit different. Saturn in Aquarius. So there's a pretty strong worldview here that there's some very interesting capitalistic worldview with Saturn and Capricorn in the 9th house. And something very interesting about working in law as well. That's pretty strong here because Saturn's own sign. Same with Saturn and Aquarius in the 9th house. There could be a very strong legal kind of career there, but there's an advocacy with that. So with Saturn and Aquarius, you'll see, and I can't wait to get to Saturn and Aquarius, but Saturn and Aquarius, you'll see there'll be a lot of advocacy for community and community law, and community belief systems, and maybe creating a community that is all around the same belief system. So the thing with Saturn and Aquarius in the 9th, there could have been never feeling like you believe or you believe the same thing as your friends, and you're kind of in these very different niche fringe groups. And then as you age, you realize that you can believe all those things and you can fit into all those groups, and that's okay, to have multiple kind of parts of you that are all different belief systems in that regard. So yeah, that's kind of all I want to say. I don't want to go too deep into these because I very obviously can, but that would be more important for like a specific chart reading. Obviously, Capricorn Aquarius risings, I try and give you guys some stuff throughout the course of this particular portion, just because it's really important to you guys. But obviously it's really important to look at the entirety of the chart, what else is going on with the chart, all those different things that I kind of spoke on. So yeah, that's really all I have to say here. Saturn and Saturn in the 9th house has been such a fun video. This whole Sag week has been so enjoyable, and I love being able to do like these deep dives into specifically what Saturn may mean in Sag in the 9th house, or what every planet may mean in Sag in the 9th house. So I appreciate you all for tuning into this. This is obviously a part of a much larger series, and you know that. And make sure to check out the playlist down below to kind of stay in touch when all those things come out, and also make sure to watch whatever else you have within your chart. And if you don't know what your chart is, check those things out down there. And then finally, please like, comment, share, subscribe, all those things. I love doing this. This is what I am here to do, in some degree, some of the many degrees of things that I do here. And I really, really enjoy being able to provide my value, provide my truth, provide my perspective on things and my perspective on astrology. So thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. And if you're interested in anything with me, feel free to book down below or reach out to me. Please comment down below as well if you have any questions about how this landed for you, or how you felt in regards to this particular video. Yeah, and I appreciate you. I love you, and I hope you have an amazing, amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Okay, bye.